And welcome to the committee. If you can please state your name for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair Anderson and Chair Kiffmeyer. Thank you for this opportunity to present our report. I'm Jim Nobles, Legislative Auditor. With me at the table is Elizabeth Stowicki, who is Legal Counsel at the Office of the Legislative Auditor. Madam Chair and members, we conducted this special review because there was an allegation that public officials had misused public resources. And for us, that involves serious legal and ethical issues. The Office of the Legislative Auditor has not only the authority, but the responsibility to investigate these kinds of allegations. However, I do want to emphasize that our review had a limited scope. This was not a full-scope audit, nor was it a comprehensive evaluation. We really focused on the use of the two suites controlled by the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority in the U.S. Bank. And there it is, the U.S. Bank, one of the most visible and most expensive buildings in Minnesota. Now, just so no one's confused, the U.S. Bank doesn't actually own that building. They paid to put their name on it. And they paid the Vikings, who had the naming rights. And so you might think, well, the Vikings own that building. Well, they did contribute a lot to building it. But the fact is, it's the people of the state of Minnesota who own that building. And they contributed a lot too, almost $500 million. In 2012, you made the decision to allow a public funding of that facility, and you declared in the law 2012 that the legislature finds and declares that the expenditure of public money for this purpose, the building of the stadium, is necessary and serves a public purpose, and that the property acquired for the construction of the stadium and related stadium infrastructure is acquired for a public use and public purpose. You also declared in that 2012 law that the new stadium was to be a multi-purpose facility. It was indeed to be the home field for the Vikings, but it was to be more than that. It's also a facility that sometimes has other kinds of professional sports events, such as soccer. But you said in the 2012 law that there would also be opportunities for amateur sports, concerts, and other entertainment kinds of events. In fact, my first opportunity and Ms. Stowicki's first opportunity to visit the stadium, because we were doing this investigation, was after a monster truck event. We didn't actually get to see what the monster trucks do, but we saw the aftermath and the cleaning of the stadium. So it's a venue that has many different kinds of activities and community events. And you'll hear this, I'm sure, from the authority, that the facility is open for people for walking, inline skating, and various other kinds of community activities. But I think one of the things for us all to keep in mind, and it really was the first time it dawned on me when I visited the stadium, that it is a commercial enterprise. It is a very large building with more than just a field for sports activities. There's a lot of space in this building that has to be rented out for meetings and parties. In 2012, you created a new public organization to be in charge of this People's Stadium. The Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, in law, is responsible for operating, maintaining, and marketing the U.S. Bank Stadium. It has 5 members. 3 are appointed by the governor, and the governor appoints the chair. 2 are appointed by the mayor of Minneapolis. They have a small staff of about 6 people and an executive director. How do they get all of their responsibilities accomplished to operate, maintain, and market this very large, very complex commercial and entertainment enterprise? They contract with SMG, which is a worldwide company that markets and manages similar kinds of facilities, stadiums and convention centers around the world. So here's what we're going to be talking about today, the two authority suites. And this is a rendering that we were allowed to take off of the U.S. Bank website. This is what is called a Norseman suite, one of the two suites that the authority controls. It has 16 seats, and if you control one of these, you get 18 tickets to each event. So you have two people in standing room. They're well situated, the Norseman suites. They're 36 rows from the field and between the two 20-yard lines. They're well equipped. They have TVs, a microwave, sink, an eating area, and catered food. And as you can see, quite a bit of space within the facility itself. The Sports Authority acquired these two suites through a use agreement with the Vikings. Again, the Vikings contributed a large sum of money to build the stadium, but they do not own it, and they do not control it. And so they had to negotiate what is referred to as a use agreement to gain their days of using the stadium. And they don't actually use the stadium for very many days, but they have complete control on those days of the Viking events. During those negotiations for the use agreement, the Sports Authority gained control of two suites, as I just referred to, the Norseman suites. They did not pay the Vikings for these two suites, and they don't pay for the tickets. They declare over and over and over again that they obtained and used these two suites to carry out their responsibility to market the stadium. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Stawicki, who's going to give us a preview of our findings and also talk about finding one.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I'm Elizabeth Stawicki. I'm legal counsel for the Office of the Legislative Auditor. We have 4 findings, which I will list, and then we will detail each of them afterwards. First, the authority claims it needs 2 stadium suites to help it market the stadium to potential customers. However, the authority gave a significant number of free suite tickets to people who had no connection to marketing the stadium, and many were family and friends of the authority's commissioners and staff. Second, we found the authority's commissioners and executive director did not violate a law when they gave free tickets to family members and friends, but they did violate a core ethical principle. Third, we found the authority's arguments that it needs 2 suites rather than 1 is not supported. And finally, we found the authority failed to comply with state law by not maintaining a record of who received tickets to its stadium suites. However, state law does allow the authority to keep certain marketing information private after it's created. So in our first finding, we found that the authority gave a significant number of free tickets to guests who had no marketing purpose to be there. Many were family and friends. When we first started this review, we asked the authority for a list of people and organizations who received free tickets, the events they attended, if anyone paid, and how much. Unfortunately, the data we received was often confusing and difficult to parse out, so we had to make some judgment calls. The data we received from the authority is included in Appendix C. Given the time constraints and the hundreds of tickets at issue, we could not make our own independent list. So we went through all of what the authority gave us and divided these tickets into 3 major categories. First, those who, by the authority's definition, were given tickets for a marketing purpose. For example, to guests who might book a future event at the stadium. Second, those where we questioned the authority's explanation that the tickets had a marketing purpose. And third, tickets given to people for no marketing purpose, family and friends. But before I go through the numbers, it's important to note that we did make several assumptions that explain our judgment calls. If the authority gave a ticket to an individual for a marketing purpose, and the individual brought a guest, say a spouse or a companion, we counted that spouse in the business column as well. We found that sometimes this is the practice for free tickets for business purposes at other events and arenas, and we thought that we would include that. You can disagree. We also gave the benefit of the doubt to commissioners and staff. We assumed that they were there for a job-related purpose, and therefore they are also in the marketing category. On the other side, there were guests who had no marketing or any purpose for being there other than to attend a game or an event. And if they had the same last name, we listed them as family. If they didn't, we just put them down as a friend. So looking at the numbers, the authority used a total of 352 tickets. And for those in the marketing purpose category, we found about 101 tickets. These were about 29%, where we took the authorities on their comments on their word that these were for a marketing purpose, and we didn't question it. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. The second part of those that are under the marketing category were those used by a commissioner or staff, and those were about 58 tickets. And then in the second area, which we called the gray area, where we kind of questioned the reason that the authority gave us. For example, during a November Vikings-Detroit matchup, 4 Metropolitan Transit staff received free tickets to the suite to, quote, review the operational flow of the light rail and bus service, observing entrance and exiting the building to help increase ridership, which benefits marketing the stadium. We questioned whether, one, it was necessary for people to be sitting in the suite to do this, and then also, two, is it even possible to be sitting in the suite and figuring out whether watching the traffic flow from that position? Now, again, we question this. There might be good reasons that they have for why this is a marketing purpose. We are just going based on what they gave us, and we put it in this questionable column. The rest are for family and friends, and where we found there was no marketing purpose, and those were 158 tickets. And so if you parse this out, it comes out to about 45% for those in the marketing category, 10% in the questionable, and then another 45% in the family and friends category. And so now I'll turn finding number 2 over to Mr. Nobles.
Madam Chair and members, as I said at the beginning, we believe that the issue here concerns legalities and important ethical violations. And as Ms. Stawicki said when she reviewed our findings, we found that the 2 primary laws that could have applied and frankly would have been violated do not apply to the authority because of the way in which you establish the authority. It is not an agency in the executive branch of state government. Therefore, the state's code of conduct, which is applicable to all officials and employees in the executive branch, simply does not apply. But if it did apply, it would clearly say you cannot use your position in state government to bring any kind of advantage or privilege to a family or friend. You have to use that position for solely for a public purpose. Also, the gift law does not apply. Also, again, for somewhat of a technicality, and that is state law does not define an entity such as the authority as a lobbyist principal. Therefore, giving a gift, a ticket, to someone does not fall under the gift law. So they did not violate the law, but we think every public official, every public organization, whether the law applies or not, has to uphold core ethical principles. And we don't think the authority did. And probably one of the most basic ethical principles in public service is that you do not use your position to obtain personal benefits or privileges for family, friends, or other personal associates. And I'll turn back to Ms. Stawicki for finding 3.
The authority claims it needs 2 suites for marketing rather than 1, but we found that their arguments are unsupported. As we found, about 158 tickets went to people who had no marketing purpose. Again, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, but the authority did not use all of the tickets it had available. So even if you added in the tickets we found questionable, you would still not need 2 suites to, you would still not need the extra suite for a dozen events. The authority also told us that it needed 2 suites to avoid allegations that commissioners were communicating outside of the open meeting law. Dividing 5 commissioners between 2 suites still leaves 3 commissioners, a quorum, in 1 suite. So we didn't quite understand how that makes sense. Nonetheless, even though the authority's arguments for the 2 suites are unsupported, we do believe the public should retain both suites. They are a public resource. They just need to be used for marketing purposes and possibly others. And we think that's where the legislature comes in, to help define and broaden what those public purposes might mean. Just because the authority didn't always use them for a public purpose does not mean that they can't be used for a public purpose in the future. For example, the authority has said that one of the reasons it gave tickets to its family and friends was because that's how things were done at the Metrodome. The Metrodome and other Minnesota stadiums also use some of those tickets for charitable purposes. Children and adults who were having serious illnesses, underprivileged children, and the elderly. And so we would suggest, and we do later in our recommendations, that's something that maybe the legislature could consider. I now turn over finding 4 to Mr. Nobles.
Madam Chair and members, this may seem like a small thing only an auditor would care about, but I think it's much more than that. You, in the law, said that every public official, every public organization is supposed to keep a public record of their business transactions. The authority did not do that. And we think that a lot of the concerns that were raised about what was going on at the stadium with the suites arose from the fact that they didn't have a list. And so by not having that list to give to the media or even to the legislative auditor promptly, I think the authority unnecessarily created a perception that they were not being transparent. It is a requirement of the law. It's also a good business practice. This, they claim, is one of their core business functions, to market the stadium with the suites. And they passed out several hundred tickets and kept no record of who received the tickets. Again, it's a violation of the law. We think it was also a bad business practice. But there is the question of whether or not they could keep some information private. And yes, under the Government Data Practices Act, they can. They can keep names and identity of individuals who are genuinely there for a marketing purpose, not public. That's in the Government Data Practices Act. But again, as we found, most of the people who received tickets were not there for a marketing purpose.